We've got all 17 hoopings finished and are ready to start putting this beauty together. And as I said, I clipped together the two triangles so I know which one goes with which. I want to get in real close here and show you exactly what I do to make sure that these are going to meet like you want them to. Okay, so it's important to look at the back of, it's important to look at the back right here. Okay, there are two stitching lines. One of them is a batting placement line and the other one is the fabric tack down. So you want to match, the outside one is the fabric tack down. So you want to match that fabric tack down up on this point, well, on the points where you're going to make them marry up like this. So you want to match the fabric tack down with the corresponding fabric tack down stitch on the other side. And I need to put my glasses on so I can see. So I take a pin. The best way to do this is to start in the middle, because if for whatever reason things are weird, you can make sure in the beginning that the ones that matter, these 2 points right here absolutely matter on the top and bottom of that star. So what I will do is at the outside, not inside in here. Let me get up close so you can see. Not inside, but outside. Okay, I'm going to put this pin right on that stitching line. And then I'm going to put it right on the stitching line on the outside of the corresponding piece, right there. Now, your seam allowances may or may not be level. That does not matter. What matters is that you match those two spots. So you want to hold your pin, let me close that up so you can see. You want to hold the pin horizontal, okay? You don't want it like this, and you don't want it like this. You want that pin completely horizontal and get the edges as horizontal as possible, okay? And then I'm going to take a pin in one side of the seam line and out the other and anchor that, okay? I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to go to the outside, the closest outside stitching on the outside stitching line, right outside of the base of the star. Put this in here, and I'm going to put it in on the outside stitching line on the base of the other one. Frito, you need to sit down. My new dog, she's investigating everything. We changed her name from Sally Mae to Frito. All right, so now we've anchored the important part, okay? And now I'm going to anchor the corner points. I'm going to put this right in the corner on the outside stitching line and right in the corner on the corresponding right there. So those match up. I'm going to make sure the pin is horizontal, and I'm going to in one side of the seam line and out the other to anchor those together, and same thing for the top. So I'm going to go in at the point right on the outside stitching line and in at the point. Okay, and that pin is horizontal. And now I'm going to go in one side of the seam line and out the other. Okay, so I've got 4 pins. I do not leave to chance that this is going to match up and be right. So that's why I anchor the important parts on these types of projects. Now, when I sew, I'm going to run, well, I don't have the foot. So the foot looks like this, okay? This is the left toe, part of the toe, and this is the right part of the toe. I'm going to run this edge, the inner edge of the foot, right in between those 2 stitch lines right there. I'll actually be sewing exactly in the middle of those 2 stitch lines, and what that does is that makes sure that you capture these ends inside that stitch line. So let's give it a shot and see how we do. I'm going to start all the way. So here is that outside stitch line, and it's lining up right with the edge of the toe. So the needle is going directly in between, and it's going to catch that outer corner in the seam allowance. All right, moment of truth. Let's see how we did. It's perfect. Look at that. It's perfect. Now I'm going to go over to the ironing station, and I'm going to open up these seams and press them flat with a clapper, a tailor's clapper. That's really important to get a very nice, gosh, look how pretty that is. Isn't that beautiful? Y'all, that couldn't be any more perfect. I'm very happy with that. So I have all 4 of my star points finished now, and it's time to put together the 9 patch. So I'll do the center row. So the star has a right side up. So you kind of got to hear, if you do it like that, it's wonky. So the star definitely has a right side up. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I will match the outer corners and probably the middle, just to make sure that the outside stitch line is captured in the seam allowance. So I will do the outer corners first. Get that pin horizontal in one side of the seam line, out the other, and make sure my star is right. Okay. That together. That looks good. And then the middle, I'm just going to go through it, see how I did. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to do that to all of these on the 9 patch. Now, you need to make sure, according to the pattern, that you get your B's and your C's 1 each on each line. Okay? And then it's opposite for the next ones. Well, we'll do that when we get there. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. No seam line. That looks great. Very pretty. I will press all these open. Okay, and make sure my star is upright, and do this one as well. Double check. I'm going to put, I guess it's C or B. Either way, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to put a B and a C, and get my star that way. Can you see how the star is slanted? If it's not here, it's upright. Okay, so I'm going to put B and C here. This one's C, this one's B. And then the next one, this is C, so it'll go down here in this corner. And B will go over here opposite. You know, I would love to chance this and just put these together and see how it goes and not fiddle with pins. Let's do it and see. Living on the edge, you guys. And I don't mind doing this because it's a pretty straightforward. I wouldn't do it on the stars. Yeah, that works. That's cute. Yeah, you want to make sure that these outer seam lines line up. That's how you do that. But that worked out pretty good. That's much quicker. Okay, that's beautiful. Okay, so this is B and this is C. That's one row. And that means that this row, C needs to be here. And then star is upright and B over here, just like that. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to go over to the ironing board and press all these seams open. I have the top row, and I'm going to attach that. Here's the middle row. So I'm going to attach the top row to the middle row, making sure my stars, whoops, straight up on all 3 of those. And I got a B on one and a C on the other, doesn't matter which. Now I'm going to right through in the seam allowance where that row of stitching, that outside row of stitching, I'm putting a pin straight through that. Whoops, it came right out, look at that. Pin straight through it, and I'm going to put a pin, I'm going to anchor it right on the other side. And look, those seam allowances are not the same. There's a discrepancy in the back, but that's okay. I want that pin horizontal. And here is where I will take a pin in each side of the seam allowance and go in one side and out the other. This is why you want long quilting pins, in one side and out the other. That is going to anchor that join right there on both of those. Because if it's off, it'll be really obvious. So I'm going to go in right here on this one. And I'm going to join it right in the intersection in the seam. Get that pin horizontal. And I'm going to pin both seam allowances open on either side of that anchor. I'm going to stitch in between those 2 stitch lines. Let's see. Oh, dang, I missed one. Okay, this one I hit right there. And this one's off. Look at that. Okay, that is completely unacceptable to me. I will not have that. So I am going to unpick from here till probably somewhere in here and then realign that. I'm going to use one of my husband's seam rippers, shameless plug. He makes these in the shop and they are stainless steel and they're the best in the world. So what I do with this is I will unpick a couple of stitches. We have these available in our store, powertoolswiththreadstore.com. Okay. And I'm going to just put the seam ripper flat and aim the ball down and put it against that stitch line, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of tension and push. Okay. That's how you do that. And it came apart just easy peasy. Let's try this again. I'm going to put the other row on now. Make sure the star is straight up. I nailed both of those. That's gorgeous. It looks beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to go press these seam allowances open. All right, I have got the 9 patch together. Now we need to get these triangles on center. And the easiest way to do that is to don't worry about measuring the block to see where center is, because visually it doesn't matter if it's measured center, mathematically correct. What matters is this center seam right here visually in the center of the block. But the easiest way to do that is to take these 2 seams, match them up together, and you can take a pin or use a friction marker or something, and I'm just going to pin in the crease. And that tells me where center is, right there. So now I can take the seam here, and I can put that right where that pin went in. And then I'm going to pin it on either side of the seam allowance. In the seam allowance on either side of that seam. Okay, and then I'm going to pin, I've got another set of seam allowances sticking up right there. I'm going to make sure I don't want this seam line or this seam line showing. So I'm going to put it through just inside that outer stitch line and take a look and make sure that I've got it. Yeah, Okay, that looks good. I don't want this one right here getting flipped over during the sewing, so I'm going to pin it down. I'm just going to even this up. I'm going to put it right in the tip, right like that, and I want to make sure that the stitch line is going to be captured in the seam allowance. See that? Let me go ahead and pin this so it doesn't move. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing over here on this edge. So this one, when I pushed it straight through, I missed. See how the pin is on the outside of the stitching? I'm just going to pull the pin back and slip it so that the stitching, I want the stitching on the outside of the pin. So the stitching is going to be in the seam allowance. That's what I want. Okay. All right. Let's see. Oh, that looks really good. See how pretty that is? That's just beautiful. And it's visually centered. It looks amazing. Okay. I'm going to do the other three. Okay, I'm ready to press these seams open for these triangles. And I'm going to be doing some clipping around the seam allowances because they're so bulky. So the way they want to lay is like this one from one of the 9 patch lays out toward the triangle point, but this one wants to lay inside. And the easiest way to make that work is to, on the outside of the seam allowance, clip to but not through the outer seam line. Need some sharp scissors, and I do it right on the edge of the seam allowance so that now it's going to lay much flatter. There. All right, this is looking just gorgeous. I am going to go around each one of these points and trim my little dog ears just to get rid of them so I don't have to worry about them being bulk when I put the backing on. We are in the home stretch here. Very, very happy. This is just beautiful. The backing is going to be put on as a turn and flip. So we're going to lay the backing face down on top of this. All right, I am ready to put the backing on, and what a perfect fabric. That is just so pretty. I love it. All right, so I am going to put this, I have ironed this flat. I'm going to put this face down, and I'm going to set it kind of square, but I'm going to make sure I have about an inch up here after this point, an inch over here, and I've got a lot. I will cut it to size, but what I am going to do is I'm going to use my Sew Tights magnets. I don't want to use any kind of spray adhesive to hold this in place. So Sew Tights, these are the HD, the blue ones. I've got a permanent coupon code. I'll link below the video. You can get 15% off these. I'm going to put the flat part, it'll go against the bed of the machine, but I'm going to, of course, put it so that it stays well out of the way. But this is going to keep the top and the backing from shifting. So I'm going to put these all over the place here. These are really nice. So handy. Awesome. And look on the back. Still nice and smooth. This looks good. I'm going to smooth this out, and then it'll find it all by itself, right? Boy, these are better than pins, you guys. Oh my goodness, I'm not getting stuck. So nice. So I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to mark that outside seam line so I know to stay to the inside of it. Because of the way that you've got this point right here, and that's going to be really hard to flip and turn when it comes time to close up. So like normally we leave an opening in the middle. Well, the opening in the middle now has a whole big point sticking out of it. I am going to make my stop point like right here and my start point about right here. That gives me enough room to get my hand in and pull it through and do all the turning and everything to give me enough room. But that way I'm only, when I trim this up, it's only going to be a flat part to turn inside and sew versus having to figure out how to fold an angle to get it to be right. That's going to be a pain, you guys. So I'm just thinking ahead there. All right, I've got my corners. I got that so it's not blind to me anymore, and we are ready to go stitch this all out. When you get to where the triangle has met, where the seam line is, where the seam allowances are, that should in a normal be where you would want to turn at a 90. However, we've got a lot of bulk here. So I recommend, instead of creating a seam that is like this, you want to create a seam that is like this. So there'll be a 2-stitch right there. Okay, so I'm gonna turn it to, instead of a 90, I'm gonna turn it to a 45, and I'm gonna take 2 stitches. And what I've done is I've given some room right there for the turn, and it's going to be a beautiful point instead of all bunched up in a big wad. That is a trick in garment sewing used on collar points, and it gives you a beautiful turn. I learned that from Janet Prey from Islander Sewing Systems in a class I took of hers. Let's see where the turn is. I'm going to mark it. Now I have this outside turn, and it should be right here on this seam line. I just want to make sure. Should, yeah. So I'm going to come up to here, right in between those 2 stitch lines, and I'm going to stitch out to here. And it should work. Should. One more. Now this is an outside turn instead of an inside turn. So we don't need to do those 2 stitches. All right, here we are at an outside turn again. I'm going to go right up to the, almost to the point. I'm going to lift my presser foot. I'm going to take a 1 stitch at the 45, and I'm going to turn it again. So it has room to turn. We're going to cut off these tips and stuff, and believe me, this works. Okay. So where this comes up, right here, this seam line, there, that's where I'm aiming. It's hard to see it because it's under a whole bunch of fabric. I'm measuring this outer seam line out here and seeing where it meets right there. So I know where to pivot. All right, all finished. I'm gonna take it over to the cutting table and trim off the excess and trim the points and then turn it. Okay, so my turn is right here. I want to make sure I don't cut that off. I like to leave a good bit. So I'm gonna come up to here and to right here. Okay, and then I'm gonna leave like 1.5 inches. Okay, so that's how I make sure I don't cut off my turn. I keep that out there. Okay, so now I'm just going to trim this even with the edge of the seam allowance. I could probably freehand this a little bit easier. Now I'm going to trim off these points right here, right at the batting, okay? And I'm even going to give it a trim like this just to give it just a little bit more room so that as these turn around, they fit up nicely together and they're not all bunching in and causing a big wad. And then right here, I'm going to cut a V like this. And that's going to give this some room to turn around. So everywhere that there's a point sticking out, don't cut the stitching, just trim right next to it. Okay, and then everywhere you have an inside point, you want to give up to the stitch line, give it some room so it can turn around. I like to reach over to the farthest part and I'm gonna put my thumb in there, in the point, and push it and then pull it through a little bit. There we go. That is pretty. Okay, now I'm going to take my point turner. This is my favorite one from Dritz. I'll link to this below. And I'm just going to go through here now and methodically go through, and I'm going to push on the white fabric, not the blue, because the white fabric can handle that point. And look how sharp that gets when you give it a little bit of space in there. You'll get beautiful points. See how it's rounded here? And then I'm going to just push with the point turner on the white fabric, and look at how pointed it becomes. And that's because I gave it that extra stitch and it gives it some room to turn. Okay, this is nice. Okay, that all looks pretty good. All right, I'm gonna go over to the ironing board now, and I'm going to press this with a load of steam to make sure that the blue fabric on the back does not show from the front. Okay, I am going to iron this from this side, and I'm gonna try to push this blue over as much as I can, and I don't want it to show from the front. I'm gonna steam the fire out of it, and then I'm gonna use my clapper and smush it down. That looks pretty good. Now on this closure, when you do this, you want to make sure don't get real close to this point. Don't leave it open all the way to here. That's very difficult to close. You want to have created a nice point with your point turner prior to getting this all under here. This is very bulky, and it never is a good spot on, I don't care whether it's a mug rug or what. You always want to leave your closure on a nice flat run. And I'm putting my stitch witchery right next to the outer seam line. I've already folded and steamed and creased the backing fabric, and now I'm just going to give it a good shot of steam and tell it where to stay. Oh, this looks nice. This is beautiful, just gorgeous. Now, if you wanted to, if you feel like it's too poofy, so if you're gonna put like a nice pretty centerpiece on this and it's just gonna sit like that on a table, then that would be fine. You may want to stitch in the ditch, and by stitch in the ditch, that means on a domestic sewing machine, you would very carefully in these seam lines, you would just run a stitch of white thread or whatever color you have. Maybe clear thread would be nice too, in the top and the bobbin, and just run this along. And what that'll do is give you some more quilting, and it will remove a lot of the poofiness. But this turned out just beautiful. Well, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I want to thank you so much for joining me. If you would like more tutorials on making Designs by JuJu projects, check out my channel on YouTube, Power Tools with Thread. We will talk to you soon. You guys go sew something. Bye.